I wouldn't blame you if you think science is boring and predictable, but trust me, it's anything but. Every field has at least one event that happened once and refused to make sense. From space anomalies to genetically engineered babies, I'm Mike with List 25, and these are 25 one-time scientific phenomena that left experts stunned. 25. Lightning-induced nuclear reactions. We all know lightning carries a massive punch, but scientists discovered it has one more trick up its sleeve. Under the right conditions, a lightning bolt can actually kick off nuclear reactions. Nobody expected that to be possible until detectors in Japan picked up a flash of gamma rays immediately after a strike. That signal only shows up when a positron and an electron collide, which means the lightning had created unstable atoms that broke apart and released antimatter. The whole event only lasted a few minutes, but it proved that thunderstorms can build rare isotopes without any help from space. That changes the way researchers look at carbon-14 and nitrogen-15, and even raises questions about what lightning might be doing on planets like Jupiter, since it has massive storms and some of the most frequent lightning in the solar system. 24. A narwhal beluga whale hybrid. An Inuit hunter shot an odd-looking whale in the 80s, and kept the skull because it didn't match anything he recognized. The skull was broader, the teeth spiraled instead of lining up neatly, and nothing about it matched the whales he knew. Years later, when scientists analyzed it, DNA revealed the truth. This was a narwhal beluga whale hybrid, the first confirmed case of the two Arctic species producing a calf together. Researchers dug deeper and found even more surprises. The teeth suggested a different feeding style, and isotope testing backed that up. While narwhals and belugas feed in the open water, this hybrid spent more time foraging on the seabed. That tells us the animal wasn't just genetically unusual. It carved out its own way of living in waters dominated by two highly specialized species. 23. Martian meteorite microfossils. ALH 84001 remains the only meteorite in history to trigger an official NASA announcement about possible extraterrestrial biology. It was discovered in Antarctica in 1984, and more than a decade later, researchers noticed tiny structures inside it that looked a lot like fossilized microbes. NASA used careful language, but the reaction was huge. Reporters flooded the story, world leaders commented on it. For a moment, a single rock turned the search for life on Mars into headline news. Excitement didn't last though. As more teams analyzed the meteorite, alternative explanations began stacking up, and the original claim eventually fell apart. Even so, ALH 84001 changed planetary science. It pushed researchers to examine meteorites more closely, and it cemented Antarctica as the perfect place to find them. 22. The CRISPR twins. In 2018, a researcher in China claimed that he had used CRISPR to alter the DNA of human embryos, and that the resulting twin girls had already been born. His edits targeted the gene linked to HIV resistance, but since the work was carried out in private, it ultimately skipped key safety steps and offered no medical benefit. The reaction was quick. Scientists around the world denounced the experiment, calling it premature and irresponsible. He Jiankui was also placed under investigation, removed from his position, and later sent to prison for violating Chinese regulations. In the aftermath, global scientific organizations tightened their guidelines, and germline editing became one of the most heavily restricted areas in biology. To this day, these twins remain the only known cases of gene-edited children, and the scientific community continues to use this case as a warning. 21. The Carrington event. The Carrington event was a huge geomagnetic storm set off by a solar flare spotted at 11:23 p.m. on September 1st, 1859. By the next morning, the burst had slammed into Earth's magnetic field. The sky lit up long before sunrise, flooding the early sky with auroras bright enough to be seen all the way down to Jamaica. People even reported reading their newspapers by the glow. Things were even worse for the telegraph system. Wires lit up, batteries overheated, and messages kept going through on their own. The electrical surge in the air was strong enough to run the telegraph network without any power source. At the time, nobody knew solar flares were a thing. We track them easily enough today, but the Carrington event stands out because it hit us directly. It was enormous. The strongest flare to reach Earth in the last 500 years. If something like that happened today, the damage would land somewhere between $1 and $2 trillion. 20. A hurricane in the South Atlantic. The South Atlantic is usually off limits for hurricanes. The conditions just aren't there. The region lacks the right disturbances to get storms started, and the wind shear is usually too strong for anything to grow. In fact, since the 70s, only a handful of tropical storms have ever formed in that entire ocean. That's why Cyclone Katrina in 2004 is such a standout moment. A routine tropical storm managed to strengthen into a full Category 1 hurricane, the only confirmed hurricane the South Atlantic has ever produced. Katrina made landfall in Brazil with winds of around 85 miles an hour, tore the roofs off thousands of homes, damaged roughly 36,000 buildings, and caused several deaths. 19. The Laotian rock rat living fossil. Scientists don't usually find new mammal families while shopping for groceries, but that's exactly what happened in Laos in 2005 when researchers spotted a strange rodent for sale at a local market. Villagers knew it as the kanyu, a common food animal, but it didn't match any species in the scientific record. When specimens were sent to museums and labs for study, the surprise became even bigger. The animal's anatomical features and DNA analysis show that it belonged to the Diatomidae family, which is a group believed to have disappeared roughly 11 million years ago. This Laotian rock rat is the only living member of this ancient lineage, making it one of the rarest finds in modern mammalogy. 18. The Berlin patient. More than 36 million people live with HIV today, and over 1 million died from it in 2015 alone. But then, there's Timothy Brown, the Berlin patient, who became the first person ever cured. His cure wasn't even planned. Brown simply needed a bone marrow transplant to treat leukemia. His doctors matched him with a donor who carried a rare mutation called CCR5 delta 32. That mutation blocks one of the main pathways HIV uses to infect cells. After 2 transplants in 2007 and 2008, Brown's HIV levels dropped to undetectable and never returned. Other patients have since been cured through the same mutation-based transplant approach, but Brown's case remains the one that changed everything. Despite that, the procedure remains risky, expensive, and only an option for people who already need a transplant for another life-threatening illness. 17. The comet Shoemaker-Levy 9 impact. Shoemaker-Levy 9 earned its place in history the moment astronomers realized it was circling Jupiter instead of the Sun. A year after its discovery in 1993, the comet broke up, and its fragments took turns slamming into Jupiter. No one had ever watched a planetary impact unfold before, so the global astronomy community mobilized. Even though the hits happened on Jupiter's night side, the scars rolled into view within minutes and stayed visible for weeks. Hubble, freshly repaired at the time, delivered the clearest images and showed plume debris rising and folding back into the clouds. The event changed more than our understanding of Jupiter. It ultimately pushed scientists and governments to take impact risks seriously and help to develop the planetary defense programs we rely on today. 16. Neurons playing Pong. In 2022, a team at Cortical Labs grew about 800,000 neurons on a dish and let them form their own little network on a microelectrode array chip. The setup could stimulate the cells and read their electrical activity, which made it perfect for testing whether a synthetic network could respond to real feedback. Once the connectors were strong enough, the researchers plugged the cells into a computer and started up Pong. The system revealed which side the ball was on, how far it was from the paddle, and sent tiny rewards when the paddle made contact. When it missed, the cells got an unfavorable signal instead. Within minutes, the neurons began to improve at the game. Yes, they actually settled into patterns that matched the feedback with better responses. A simple form of learning that the team later described as a move towards synthetic biological intelligence. As you can imagine, experts had plenty to say. However, what everyone agreed on was the significance. A cluster of neurons learning to play a video game is definitely something worth noting. 15. The plant-animal mystery. When researchers discovered Mesodinium chameleon in 2012, they realized they were dealing with something that didn't fit the usual playbook. It moves and hunts like an animal, pulling in plant cells for food. Once it absorbs them, though, it shifts gears and starts photosynthesizing with the stolen chlorophyll. For a while, it behaves like a plant. Then it breaks down the chlorophyll, abandons the plant role, and becomes an animal again. No other creature goes back and forth like this. The species lives in deep coastal waters, and scientists have struggled to study it because they've not been able to keep it in a stable long-term culture. They still do not know how much energy it gets from photosynthesis, why it cycles between states, or what advantage the unique strategy gives it. 14. The oh my god particle. The most powerful cosmic ray ever detected arrived over Utah in 1991, hit the atmosphere, and sent every assumption in astrophysics into a tailspin. Researchers called it the oh my god particle because its energy was so absurd it shouldn't exist. At 3.2 times 10 to the 20th electron volts, the particle carried as much kinetic energy as a thrown baseball. No known star, black hole, or galactic engine can accelerate matter anywhere near that range. Even stranger, a particle that energetic shouldn't bend much as it travels through space, which means scientists should have been able to point straight back to its origin. Instead, the trail led nowhere. Researchers kept checking and rechecking the data, and every time since, they've ended up staring at a part of the sky that has absolutely nothing going on. 13. Metallic hydrogen. Metallic hydrogen has always been one of physics' white whales, and for a moment in 2017, a Harvard team thought they finally had it. Using a diamond anvil cell, they squeezed hydrogen to pressures higher than the Earth's core until it turned reflective, a key sign of the long-theorized metallic state. They guarded their one-of-a-kind sample for months, waiting for peer review, and were getting to send it to a national lab for deeper analysis. Then, everything fell apart. During a routine pressure check, the diamonds holding the sample suddenly fractured with a sharp snap. When the device was opened, the hydrogen had vanished. Losing the pressure meant it either escaped as gas or was trapped somewhere in the shattered diamond dust. Critics have since argued that real metallic hydrogen wouldn't have lasted that long anyway, while the Harvard team maintains they saw exactly what they claimed. So, until someone reproduces the result, the only sample on record is the one that broke with the diamonds. 12. The wow signal. In 1977, a radio telescope at Ohio State picked up a 72-second burst of energy from deep space that no one has been able to explain since. It was so clean, so strong, and so perfectly narrow band that astronomer Jerry Amen circled it on the printout and wrote "wow" in the margin, which is how it got its name. The telescope could only scan that part of the sky once per rotation, and when it swung back, the signal was gone. Comets got blamed for a while, and so did random radio static, but deeper analysis ruled both out. It's never been repeated, and decades of searches have all come up empty each time. 11. A synthetic embryo. Researchers in Israel pushed developmental biology into new territory when they built a mouse embryo entirely from stem cells. They guided the cells through each stage, and the cluster gradually organized itself into an embryo-like structure with the early outline of a brain, a beating heart, and a primitive gut. It was the first time anyone had watched stem cells assemble something this complex on their own, and it showed just how much information those cells already carry. The breakthrough has practical weight too. It could help scientists study early development without relying on animal embryos, and may someday shape the way we grow tissue for transplants. And while the reaction wasn't anything like the uproar that followed the CRISPR-edited twins, experiments like these keep raising new ethical questions, which is why the work is being watched so closely. 10. A star with perfect rings. In 2022, the James Webb telescope took a photo that looked like a bright star wrapped in a stack of perfect rings, with 8 sharp spikes shooting outward. The shot went viral almost immediately, mostly because everyone was trying to figure out what they were looking at. The spikes turned out to be a normal optical effect from Webb's mirrors, so nothing unusual there. The rings were the part that mattered. After a closer look, researchers realized the light wasn't from one star, but 2. They orbit each other on an 8-year cycle, and every time they swing close and pull apart again, they throw out a fresh layer of dust. Webb just happened to catch a whole series of those layers in a single shot. 9. A neutron star merger. The science Einstein predicted over a century ago finally showed up in 2017, and the match between theory and reality was almost too perfect. 2 neutron stars smashed into each other. And for the first time, the universe announced it in two ways at once. LIGO and Virgo picked up on the gravitational wave first, a sudden rise of energy that signaled a merger was underway. Less than 2 seconds later, telescopes around the world saw the light from the same event. That glowing aftermath, called a kilonova, gave researchers confirmation that these collisions forge heavy elements like gold and platinum. It closed decades of theory and guesswork and kicked off what scientists now call multi-messenger astronomy. Instead of relying on light alone, they had a new roadmap. Gravitational waves marked the event, and telescopes caught everything that came after. Gravitational waves marked the event, and telescopes caught everything that came after. 8. The Dropner Rogue Wave. For centuries, sailors swore they had seen single skyscraper-sized waves appear out of nowhere, and for centuries, scientists blamed their reports on bad memories. Then, the Dropner platform settled the argument. On January 1st, 1995, a laser sensor on the North Sea structure logged a lone wave, 25.6 meters high, roughly 84 feet, in a sea where the average waves were closer to 40 feet. That made it a textbook rogue wave, twice the significant wave height, and this time the numbers came from hard data. The wave smacked into the structure, left damage at the recorded level, and forced everyone to admit these things really do happen. Once the Dropner data was confirmed, wave models changed, insurance companies took another look at their odds, and the old sailor stories didn't sound so dramatic anymore. Guinness now recognizes it as the first proven rogue wave. 7. Life forms merging into a new organelle. Biologists are used to strange partnerships, but the nitroplast pushed that idea into new territory. For years, scientists saw hints that a tiny nitrogen-fixing microbe lived inside a group of marine algae. When new studies landed in 2024, they found the relationship had crossed a line. The microbe was no longer acting like a guest. It had become a full organelle that the algae controlled. It grew when the algae grew, it divided when the algae divided, and it relied on the host to supply the proteins it could no longer make on its own. What makes this so remarkable is how rarely life pulls off this trick. Only a few times in Earth's history has a cell swallowed another cell and turned it into permanent machinery. Mitochondria came from the first event. Chloroplasts came from the second. A much later event created the third, more obscure organelle, and now the nitroplast joins that short list. 6. The first animal on Earth that doesn't breathe. Every multicellular animal on Earth shares one basic trait. They use oxygen to create energy. That rule held up until researchers sequenced the genome of Henneguia salmonicola, a tiny parasite that lives inside fish. When they went looking for the mitochondrial DNA that runs respiration, they found nothing. This creature is the first proven animal with no breathing genes at all. The parasite belongs to the Myxozoans, a group that slowly stripped away most of their ancestral biology. Where their jellyfish relatives are complex hunters, H. salmonicola functions as a near single-cell drifter. It relies on its host for almost everything, which may explain why it ditched the machinery used for oxygen. Scientists suspect it pulls energy directly from the tissue it invades, much like other Myxozoans known to hijack ATP from their hosts. 5. A quadruple star system in the Milky Way. Brown dwarfs are already mysterious, so finding two of them orbiting each other inside a 4-star system was a big moment. A research team digging through data from Gaia and NASA's WISE project spotted a dim companion around a red dwarf, only to realize it wasn't one companion at all. It was a brown dwarf pair. And the red dwarf wasn't alone either. It had its own partner. That gave astronomers a rare chance to study brown dwarfs with a built-in reference point. Red dwarfs evolve slowly and predictably, so by measuring those, researchers could finally anchor the age and chemistry of their faint brown dwarf neighbors. The system, about 82 light-years away, appears to be between 300 million and 2 billion years old. Both brown dwarfs sit near Jupiter in size, but hold 10 to 30 times its mass. It's the only known quadruple system arranged in this double-double layout. 4. A partial supernova. There's a white dwarf called SDSS J1240 plus 6710 that's racing across the Milky Way at nearly 600,000 miles an hour, which alone raises eyebrows. Its atmosphere raises even more. Instead of the usual hydrogen and helium found on white dwarfs, this one is packed with elements created in the first stage of a thermonuclear supernova. The heavier materials that normally appear later in the blast are missing. When researchers dug into data from Hubble and Gaia, the story that emerged was almost unbelievable. It looks like the star began to explode, lost a huge chunk of its mass, and then the nuclear chain reaction somehow stopped halfway through. That unfinished detonation would explain its low mass, bizarre chemistry, and runaway speed. 3. Heat behaving like sound. The second sound started as a prediction from the 1930s. It's the idea that heat can travel as a wave instead of spreading out the usual way. The theory sat on paper for decades because no one could get a clear look at it. That changed when a team working with ultra-cold lithium finally figured out how to track the heat itself. They cooled the atoms until they slipped into a superfluid state, warmed one side, and watched the heat swing across the cloud and swing back again. The gas barely moved, but the temperature pulsed through it like a signal. This kind of heat flow shows up in extreme places, including things like neutron stars, and it may help scientists to finally understand the materials that could someday carry power with almost no energy loss. 2. Hein's stingray. Hein's stingray has one of the strangest origin stories in marine biology. In 1902, an Austrian couple named Wilhelm and Marie Hein ended up under house arrest in the town of Kishin, Yemen. So Marie passed the time by collecting more than 2,000 biological specimens, including 2 tiny stingrays she dropped into a jar of formalin and mailed back to Austria. That jar landed in a museum where it gathered dust for more than 100 years. When biologist Alec Moore finally examined the fish in 2017, he realized their features didn't match any known species. A year later, they were formally named Hein stingray. The sad part is that the ongoing conflict among Yemen's coast has blocked any further study, so those 2 specimens collected in 1902 may be the only ones the world will ever see. Some researchers fear the species may already be gone. 1. The Barbenheimer star. J0931 plus 0038 sat in the catalogs for years before anyone realized what it really was. When researchers re-examined it in 2024, they found chemical clues pointing back to a single giant star, somewhere around 80 solar masses. They ended up calling that long-gone star the Barbenheimer star, mostly because the evidence looked split between 2 totally different stories, the same way those 2 opposite movies landed on the same day in 2023. The explosion that created J0931 happened about 13 billion years ago, but the chemistry it left behind is all wrong. The star is missing the lighter elements expected from that era and is overloaded with heavier elements that shouldn't appear that early. Even stranger, a star that big isn't supposed to blow itself apart. It should collapse into a black hole without leaving much behind. By all accounts, it shouldn't have formed. It shouldn't have exploded, and it shouldn't have left a star like J0931 behind. Yet, that's exactly what happened. And that's it for me today. You guys truly are the best. But before you go, what's something that left you completely stunned? Let me know in the comments. And if you're still on a science kick, our related video, 25 mind-boggling scientific phenomena, is perfect for that. It's got tiny particles misbehaving, cosmic mysteries that never line up. You know, all the fun stuff. The link to that video will be popping up right about here. As always, thank you guys so much for watching. Like, share, comment, subscribe, notification bell, and I'll see you again next time.